if we beat Penn State today, how mammoth of a story is that?
That's a big deal. I mean, that'd be huge. I mean, just from a perspective of IU being seen as a program, crawling out of the depths. I think the Big Ten needs schools like Minnesota, needs programs like IU to start to improve how they're seen nationally, because for some reason mid-tier SEC schools that would get absolutely murdered by their top conference team and Big Ten schools that are similar but get absolutely murdered by their top competition are seen in two different lights. And they can be like, well, because on a neutral field, Florida would beat the crap out. We don't know that. In fact, if you look over like the last several years, outside of the top team or two, the SEC struggles in bowl games, even though they're heavily favored in most of them. And the old SEC excuse is always like, well, the guys just weren't really motivated to play because it's not for a championship. Stop. So, you get that crap from like the Paul Feinbaums of the world, who's just a giant SEC, or Tim Brando, when Tim Brando used to work for CBS, but now that he works for Fox, he's like, yeah, I had to say all these things for the SEC. But I just think that having IU be good is awesome. It's great for the state because there's just a new energy around the program. I loved when Ohio State and IU games, those handful of years when they were like close, they were great games. And I think anytime you can bring up the overall competition level in the conference, it's a good thing. I have no problem seeing them succeed, and especially come bowl season, I'd love to see IU match up against like Auburn and beat the crap out of them. It would be awesome.
Let's get into some of these big games. I want to get into the Notre Dame Navy game here in just a moment. Riggin can't join us. He had something come up on the home front that he's happened to take care of. Appreciate Adam Jividen sticking around for some overtime with us and talking some college football with us. Let's stay in the Big Ten here for a little bit before we get into some of these other games. Number 15, Michigan hosts Michigan State. Big in-state rivalry, huge in-state rivalry. But are we both shocked? At the beginning of the season, we're talking about Jim Harbaugh. He's on the hot seat. Michigan is way overrated. We're having a completely different conversation about the Michigan Wolverines today than what we were at the beginning of the season.
Yeah, I'm not surprised. Who have they beaten? They beat Notre Dame in a monsoon. Like, if you put that game in a not monsoon where Ian Book can actually get the ball down the field, I think maybe a different story. But that's their only decent win. You wait 2 weeks, and we'll see what happens. If Michigan is within 3 scores of Ohio State, I'll be like, all right, good job, guys. Like, you aren't as bad as I thought you were. Because their offense is terrible. You know what? I'm so not worried about them that I can refer to them by name. Because the rivalry with Penn State has been more of a rivalry in recent years than Michigan. You tell me what in any game, and then you have Don Brown. Sure, well, Ohio State, they need to be careful because we're really getting our defense together. Okay, Don Brown. Like, who have you beaten? And this is what they do every year. Last year they had that big revenge tour, and we're coming to Columbus, and we're going to beat the crap out of you. And then we hang the most points on them in program history. And here's the best part, Michigan. Our offense is better this year than it was last year. Good luck with that. And your defense is worse, and our defense is better. So, like, I was breaking down the Ohio State roster just the other day, position by position, against the 2014 team that won the national title, against that vaunted Alabama team, and then boat raced Oregon in the national championship. And here's the scary thing, Tom. This team, position by position, is better. This is the most dominant Ohio State team I've ever seen. And they're getting better every week. If Rutgers, for crying out loud, Maryland wouldn't, if we didn't bench our starters at the end of the second quarter, we might have scored 100. Like, it was. That's how bad it was.
There was never going to be a ball game with you and Maryland. Wisconsin and Nebraska today. Wisconsin, I think, has been a bit of a talking about teams where they were at the beginning of the season to where they are now. I think Wisconsin has been a kind of a letdown. Nothing really to see here. No, they're there.
Yeah, they're held back by their quarterbacks, like always. Like, I feel like that's the story every year for Wisconsin. It's like their defense is solid, their running game is good, they have a great offensive line. If their quarterback is remotely competent, they'll win 10 games. That's kind of the MO for Wisconsin. And once again, it was proven Jack Cohen, not really competent. But they've got a good freshman in the wings. Who knows? He may be good later. I think Nebraska is like, they're just a hot mess. I think Wisconsin wins just because Nebraska sucks again.
Yeah. A total disappointment there because they're a couple of years ago with their new coach hire, thought they were really going to turn things around, but they've been a disappointment as well. Let's move on across the top 25 of what's going on. Oklahoma State hosts the Kansas Jayhawks. Not a lot to see here. I certainly think Oklahoma takes care of business and checks off another box today.
Yeah, Oklahoma State's good program. Kansas is terrible. Kansas is like the Maryland Rutgers of the Big 12. I mean, they're just not good. But, I mean, if you think about it, like, what from a recruiting perspective, like, what would make a top recruit be like, I want to play football at Kansas? Nothing. At least it was like, guys, we're close to Chicago. Like, that's kind of the...
Yeah, Kansas is definitely
it's bad.
Definitely a basketball. Hey, let's veer off into basketball just to have the conversation. We're not going to be having this conversation about University of Evansville in March, but it's fun to have the University of Evansville beating Kentucky in November conversation now. That was huge. I'm from Evansville, so I like the Aces. I don't have a dog in that fight per se, but I hate UK, and so anytime you can beat UK, I'm okay with that.
Hating UK is the same as having a dog in the fight because I hate UK. So like,
true.
It's no different. I root for Ohio State and everyone that plays Michigan.
That's right. So, how big was that? I mean, that had huge national implications. Every national sports talk show in the nation was talking about that game.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that's one of those things. If Evansville can just have we can hang this. We can remember when this happened. Because not only did they beat Kentucky, this isn't like a Billy Gillispie Kentucky team that was like, well, Kentucky's Kentucky, but only kind of. Like, those Billy Gillispie teams weren't even making the tournament. Evansville beat the number one team in the country.
Yeah, they did.
That's freaking incredible. I mean, and the best part is it wasn't even like a Maui Invitational thing where the excuse could be like, well, they were like in Hawaii and they they were caught up in all the they beat them at home, dude. This is straight up Appalachian State going into Michigan and knocking level kind of win.
We are still talking about that game, aren't we? We are still talking about Appalachian State.
But we'll be doing the same thing with Evansville. We'll be like, Absolutely. Dude, do you remember when that happened? Like, it's just because the number one team will typically, whoever's number one, on average, loses. Who's number one within the first couple weeks of the season, on average, loses 4 games a year, barring humongous injury. That's kind of the average, is 4 to 6 games a year. Okay? If they lose 4 to 6 games a year, and you're one of the teams that knocks them off at home, and you're a program like Evansville that most people in the United States couldn't even tell you where that town is located.
You're right about that.
That's a big deal.
Evan who?
That's a big. I mean, literally, I had friends that were UK fans on Facebook that were like, "Hey, we're gonna go see UK kill Evansville. It's awesome!" Like pregame, and I was just like watching their Twitter feed like as it's happening, and they're just like sinking into depression because they got these cheap seats. They all came to watch to watch UK basically think it was going to be like a Harlem Globetrotters style exhibition game, and then they lose. Like, it's fantastic. I was loving every second of it.
Another big game on tap today. Navy visits Notre Dame. Always a big game. But here's the thing. Navy's a good team. They're 7-1. Notre Dame is 7-2. Navy's always a good team. Very disciplined team. But Notre Dame struggled with Army. So or who was it that struggled? I think it was Notre Dame, or maybe it was Michigan. Either which way, Army's not changed their scheme in a long time, and Navy's a lot like that. But this is always a big game to watch. Notre Dame hosts the Navy midshipmen.
Dude, military academies are hard. Just because they're incredibly sound, they generally do not beat themselves, and they're not afraid of anyone. Because, who's going to be more intimidating? Like, a college football player or your drill sergeant? If you think they're just those schools are the service academies are incredibly just everything they do it to the best of their ability, and it's just I get terrified playing. If anytime Ohio State has to play a service academy, I'm like, well, this game's going to be rough, and you can't take those results and factor them into anything else. And so, do I think Notre Dame will win? I do. Do I think the game is going to be so close that everybody in South Bend is biting their nails? You bet. Because that's how games go against the service academy.
Sure.
It's generally one of two things. It's either a nail biter that gets finished out in the last 5 minutes, or it's an utter blowout. And usually the utter blowouts happen against Air Force, because Air Force is not at that quality level as their compatriots with the Army and the Navy.
We could always make Air Force jokes, but we won't, because Rick was an Air Force vet. And I know this was Veterans Day week this week. So hats off. Well, Veterans Day was last week, I'm sorry. But either which way, hats off to all the veterans in the service academies as well. All right, let's talk about your Ohio State Buckeyes. Sitting at number 2, should be number 1, but LSU's number 1. We know why. Well, heck, they beat Alabama. What a game that was. What a fantastic game that was. Let's talk a little bit about your Ohio State Buckeyes in the top 25 top rankings, if you will. You've got LSU, Ohio State, Clemson, Georgia, and Bama down at number 5. When was the last time we saw that? Go ahead, Adam.
So I'll just get on our game real quick. You will see starters at halftime, and I'm going to guess the score somewhere in the neighborhood of 72-7 or 3. They'll get some sort of score in the second half against our backups, because our second team could probably beat Rutgers by 40. I think the rankings are honestly kind of ridiculous when you consider that Georgia lost to South Carolina at home, who just lost to Western Carolina. Are you serious? And then they're well, they have quality opponents in Notre Dame and Auburn. I'll give you, Notre Dame's a solid program. They're not as good as they were last year, but it's still a good school. They're really being held down by their offensive coordinator, Jeff Long. He does not know how to call a game for this offense, to save his life. But to have Minnesota, who has the second best win of any team in the top 10 in that win last week over Penn State, how are they at 8? I don't understand. How are programs like Oregon and Utah? Because when you go, well, Alabama has not played anybody except LSU. So they've played one tough team and lost. I get the argument that, well, I think that Oregon and I think that Minnesota and I think that Utah would lose on a neutral site to Alabama. You can say I think, but Alabama hasn't proven yet that they can beat anybody of good merit. And I thought the whole point of this playoff was that you're going off of what